Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, what the Timberwolves need to do to break out of this two-game funk they've been in as the series against the Nuggets is now tied at 2 games apiece. Can the Timberwolves adjust back on Nikola Jokic? Can they adjust to the Nuggets adjustment that they've made over the last couple of games? Plus, can Ant get some help? Can the Timberwolves role players finally play better? This vaunted depth Minnesota had, it should have been an advantage over Denver, has looked anything but over the last couple of games. We'll break the whole thing down as we preview Game 5. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy game day. Game 5 in Denver this evening. It's a 9:30 Central tip. Really excited. And today we're going to talk about some of the adjustments I talked about on Monday's show that Denver made over the course of games 3 and 4 in Minnesota, and how the Timberwolves failed to adjust on the fly, or at least, fully adjust. What might look different in game 5, what I think the Timberwolves need to account for here as we look at again, what Denver's done adjustment wise, how the Timberwolves have tried to guard Jokic. We'll talk about the role player stuff. Denver's bench and role players overall have just vastly outplayed Minnesota's over the last couple of games. And frankly, Anthony Edwards just needs a little bit of help. Dude was otherworldly on Sunday in game 4 and just did not get the help that he needed. So we'll talk about all that on the show here today. Big thank you, first of all, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can find this show, and again, wherever you like to watch, including YouTube as well as Roku and Amazon Fire TV, you can do that. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Also, a reminder about the postcast. I know it'll be late tonight, probably close to midnight Central Time. I'll actually be hosting the postcast this evening with Jack Borman of Canis Hoopus, and we'll be breaking down Wolves Nuggets Game 5 immediately following the game. You'll find that over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. And then the audio will be right here in your feed. The next episode in your feed actually will be right here on the Locked On Wolves audio feed. So that's all upcoming here yet tonight. All right. So diving into potential adjustments from the Wolves to counteract what Denver has done to this point in the series. One of the biggest things, we talked about this on Monday's show, the post-game pod from Sunday night's loss in game 4, was that Denver, and they did this in game 3 as well as game 4, but game 3, a lot of things went off the rails, right? Game 4, the Timberwolves had to deal with Denver having Aaron Gordon bring the ball up the floor. And there were a couple of reasons we did that Denver did this. And we talked about this on Monday, that it was partly to reduce wear and tear on Jamal Murray, right? Allow him to set up in the half court, off the ball to start the set, free and easy, not having to deal with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Jaden McDaniels, etc. Just kind of on his hip the whole way down the floor. It also keeps the Wolves from just easily matching Rudy up on Aaron Gordon, because the Timberwolves then just need to hunt that switch in the half court at, try and find the most advantageous moment to execute that switch. Otherwise, if you still want to put ball pressure on Aaron Gordon, that means you're gonna use Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you're gonna use Jaden McDaniels, you're gonna use Anthony Edwards, which means that Rudy's guarding somebody else in the half court, probably Michael Porter Jr., and then you've got to end up finding a way to switch back, or you just don't use ball pressure the whole way up the floor. And as effective as that was in game, the first 2 games, especially game 2, when Rudy Gobert wasn't even in the game for Minnesota, he missed that game entirely. And so that wasn't a thing the Wolves had to necessarily, this wasn't a problem they had to solve then. And Denver said, look, if the Wolves are now addicted to this full court pressure, this trapping at the timeline that went viral across the NBA mediascape after game 2, Denver was like, hey, we don't think the Wolves are going to give this up. And they were right. They let Aaron Gordon bring the ball up the floor. He's the right combination of size and ball handling to deal with Alexander Walker, McDaniels, etc. And it allowed Jamal Murray something of a break. And it forced Rudy to guard somebody else in the half court, which threw off the Wolves' plan entirely. And at times, it ended up being him guarding Nikola Jokic. And as good as Rudy Gobert is defensively, and he is a generationally impactful defensive player, we talked about this in the regular season and setting up for this series based on the regular season matchups. He doesn't guard Nikola Jokic one-on-one well. I mean, Jokic uses his body so well and can avoid Gobert's wingspan, and has that lower center of gravity, and is just such a skilled player all the way around. I mean, nobody can guard Jokic really one-on-one, right? Karl-Anthony Towns has been far more successful than Rudy Gobert over the course of the season, and really going back to last year too. If you look at their head-to-head numbers, Cat guarding Jokic is much better, much better than Rudy guarding Jokic one-on-one. That's why the Wolves went to the Rudy free safety, Rudy helper role, floater, essentially, along the, underneath the basket along the baseline. And by Aaron Gordon bringing the ball up the floor, it completely discombobulates the Timberwolves defensively. And then down the stretch in this game, the second piece of this was Jokic was killing them so badly that the Timberwolves, if you watch back the end of the fourth quarter, or really kind of the whole fourth quarter when Jokic got back in the game, the Timberwolves were just so loaded up on Jokic. It almost in a way was the equivalent of what the Suns did to Anthony Edwards in the first round, where the Timberwolves were just like, we don't care who's there. Let's bring all the bodies to the side of the floor where Jokic is. And it left the floor totally unbalanced defensively for Minnesota. And that hurt them with offensive rebound opportunities for Denver. And obviously Jokic is an incredible passer. And so it was him finding cutters, him finding open shooters. And that really hurt Minnesota because they were so worried about Jokic beating them because he was just cooking Rudy Gobert one-on-one. And he was. It doesn't mean I'm not going to go as far as I saw it. I avoided watching all the screaming. If you've heard the read that I've done the last several weeks on the show, all the screaming on ESPN and Fox Sports or whatever. Kendrick Perkins saying that Rudy Gobert was a liability defensively in the postseason. I'm not going to go that far. He had a really bad game before. He did. And unfortunately, so did Karl-Anthony Towns. Karl-Anthony Towns more offensively. Rudy wasn't great on either end of the floor, but one-on-one, it's not great for the Wolves to have him guarding Jokic one-on-one. Now, part of this is he simply needs to be better. Both can be true, right? Karl-Anthony Towns can be the better choice to guard to guard Nikola Jokic. But Rudy Gobert, when he's guarding Jokic one-on-one, needs to provide better resistance than he did in this game. Both can be true, and both are true. Gobert's got to be better. The Wolves have to find as many opportunities as they can to have Towns guard Jokic in the half court and Rudy be the floater, the help defender that, he is so impactful at that role. So Denver's adjustment to Murray not bringing the ball to the floor, having Gordon bring the ball to the floor, saved Murray. It forced the Wolves to scramble defensively to get the matchups that they wanted. And then the unbalanced floor down the stretch when Jokic just couldn't miss was a big issue as well. What's Minnesota's counter going to be to that? Now, my take on it is I just don't think you need the ball pressure. If they want to have Aaron Gordon bring the ball up the floor, fine. Just have Rudy pick him up on the perimeter. Just have him, Rudy, be smart. Don't put yourself in a position where you're going to want to give the referee money signs after the play because you picked up a blocking foul 30 feet from the basket. Pick him up at half court. Or whatever. Like, they don't want Aaron Gordon running the entire offensive set anyway. Like, he's going to eventually give that ball up to Jamal Murray or Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or Jokic or whatever. So my take is just don't still have Gobert pick Gordon or pick up Gordon, but just don't have him pick him up until after he gets across the timeline. That's what I would do to adjust. We'll see what Minnesota does. I don't know why Denver would do anything differently. This is working great, but that's how the playoffs go, right? A team makes an adjustment. It works for a game, maybe half a game, maybe a game and a half plus. And then the other team's like, well, is this really working? But then, like, you might overplay that initial adjustment because what's the Wolves adjustment going to be? And then it's the back and forth, and it's how two good teams that are well coached with incredible personnel can end up playing a 6 or 7 game series, is because you get these adjustments and counter adjustments. And I'm very curious to see how that shakes out here as we head into game 5 on Tuesday night. All right, I want to talk depth. I want to talk role players. I want to talk a little bit about related to depth. A note about a player the Wolves no longer have on the roster that I think would be a good fit in the series. I'm going to give a hat tip to my guy Jack Borman over at Canis Hoopus on this one as well. He wrote about it after the game on Sunday night. So talk a little bit about that, and then I guess also that Ant needed help thing is also a depth role player conversation. So all that's upcoming here next, and then also what to expect here in Game 5 coming up next as well. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And I'll tell you, yesterday when I did this segment, following right after the Wolves Nuggets game 4, the Timberwolves were 5-point underdogs in Denver for game 5. And I said, I was surprised. I thought it would open closer to 4, and I thought the line would move down. Well, it's at 4 now. The Wolves are +4 in Denver, which is what I thought it should have been when I did this show 24 hours ago. So I was right on that, or at least where the line ended up. I shouldn't say ended up. There's still time. Obviously, could move again. But Minnesota +4 is not looking bad, right? Obviously, the road teams won every game in this series so far. I understand why Denver is favored, but 5 seemed a little bit rich. 4 seems, more in line. The Wolves are +152, the money line, and -108 odds at +4 with the spread for the Wolves in Denver in game 5. Again, new customers at FanDuel get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If so, do you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? I know I do if I have it on my TV. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. So we talked adjustments regarding Jokic. Let's talk a little bit about the I think we can call it shocking play of the role players on each respective team. I talked glowingly about the Timberwolves' depth after games 1 and 2, and I think rightfully so. I admittedly poked fun at Denver's depth, right? At a depth they didn't trust, the young depth that they arrogantly said, hey, Christian Brown and Zeke Naji and Peyton Watson, and these guys are going to contribute. And then these vets like Justin Holiday and Reggie Jackson, these guys can contribute. But then when it came down to it, they didn't want to play anybody in the games 1 and 2. Now, just 2 games later, it's the Timberwolves depth that looks completely overmatched. Now, Naz Reid played well in game 2. He should have played more than the 19 minutes he saw the floor. He was 5 of 6 shooting, 11 points, 4 boards in 19 minutes. But outside of game 2, Nickeil Alexander-Walker has not been good. He wasn't great in game 1. In game 3, Nickeil was 2 of 5 shooting, missed all 3 of his 3-point attempts, had a couple of turnovers in 26 minutes. In game 4, he had 2 points on 7 shots, was 0 of 4 outside the arc, 1 of 7 overall from the field. He did have 3 assists, but he was at -20 in 24 minutes. Not a good game from Nickeil. Kyle Anderson, even worse. Kyle Anderson played 13 minutes in game 3, was a -16. And again, I'm not a big plus-minus single game guy, but that's a big number for 13 minutes. But if you thought that was a big number, in game 4, he was a -18 in 6 minutes. The Timberwolves were outscored 22-4 in the minutes that Kyle Anderson was on the floor in this game. It's not a good matchup for Slow-Mo. He did play well in game 2 when there was no Rudy Gobert because he was pressed into duty. The Wolves played a little bit smaller. They were more active. The length, yet still the mobility of Kyle Anderson was effective in that game. But overall, it's not a great matchup for Kyle Anderson. So the Timberwolves' depth of primarily Alexander Walker, Kyle Anderson, go a little bit deeper, and apparently they're not trusting Monte Morris right now. He didn't play at all in game 4, and in game 3, he didn't play rotation minutes either. I mean, Jordan McLaughlin got a couple of rotation minutes early in that game. But there was, I shouldn't say early, it was like third quarter. So neither backup point guard played in the first half of game 3. McLaughlin got the Monte Morris minutes, if you will, in the third quarter of that game. So a couple things. Let's start here. First of all, Denver's role players are obviously shooting the ball extremely well right now. Last game, game 4, Christian Braun made his only 3-point attempt. Justin Holiday was 3 of 5. Reggie Jackson was 2 of 3. Aaron Gordon was 2 of 2. So what is that? 5, 6, 7, 8. So they were 8 for 10. Is that right? 8 for 11 from outside the arc. Brown, Jackson, Holiday, and Aaron Gordon shot a combined 8 for 11 on 3-point attempts. Now, none of those guys was an above average 3-point shooter during the season, but yet they shot the ball lights out. Go back to game 3, and Justin Holiday was 2 of 3. Christian Braun was 1 of 2. Aaron Gordon was 3 of 4. Who did I miss? Justin Holiday was 2 of 3. Oh, Reggie Jackson was 0 of 2, I guess, in that game. But even still, combine those, and they shot what? I'm doing this math. I should have done it earlier. 6 of 11, 6 of 12 in that game. So still much better than you'd expect that group of players to be. And you look on the Wolves side, Kyle Anderson's not trying to shoot a 3. Nickeil Alexander-Walker was 0 of 3 in game 3. He was 0 of 4 outside the arc in game 4. Kyle Anderson's, again, not shooting threes. You add in Jaden McDaniels, I guess that would be the equivalent of the Aaron Gordon 3-point shooting. The starter that neither team really wants to guard. Jaden was 1 of 3 from outside the arc last game, hit that big one from the above the break late to keep the Wolves in it, but 0 of 2 the game before. So 1 of 5 over the last couple of games. Whereas Aaron Gordon is 5 of 6 over the last 2 games from outside the arc. Now, this is flipping on its head what I said after game 2. Obviously, both teams felt confident in some level in their depth, or they wouldn't have built the rosters the way they did. Both teams have good role players. I still think the Wolves have better true depth, but there's no question that Denver's depth is outplaying Minnesota's over the last couple of games, and they're deploying their depth in a much more effective way. I don't think there's any arguing that at all. The second piece of this is something that I want to give a shout out to Jack Borman for pointing this out in the way he did. And this, again, Jack over at Canasupis, he's the editor-in-chief over there. He'll be on the postcast tonight, and he'll be on the basketball party show on Wednesday. We'll talk more about that here in a minute, in a few minutes. But he wrote in his kind of game recap, game story following game 4, he was talking about how Kyle Anderson didn't play well. Then he said, Slow-Mo's a great player in the right context. This is, again, quoting from Jack Borman at Canasupis. Slow-Mo is a great player in the right context and is capable of making a big-time impact, as we saw in game 2 without Gobert. But he struggled all season in minutes with 2 other bigs on the floor. Side note, that's him at the 3, which was a concern of mine heading into this season because Slow-Mo's worst minutes of his career have come at the 3. He's better as a smallish ball 4 and a really small ball center, not like we saw in game 2, with no Gobert, but not as a 3, which is what he spent so much of the season doing. And last year in a Wolves uniform, he spent so much of the year at the 4 because of the Karl-Anthony Towns injury. And, but now this year with the big contract for Naz and a relatively healthy cap for most of the season meant that Slow-Mo played more 3, which is why we saw him be less effective overall this year. Anyway, Jack goes on to say, the Wolves coaching staff continues to ignore not only pretty stark numbers, but Monte Morris too. If they won't play him, meaning Morris, in situations that call for him, then the deadline deal is nothing short of a swing and a miss. Not that Troy Brown Jr. is the difference between a win and a loss. He could have been an antidote to the current, quote, round peg, square hole problem plaguing the Wolves' blended starters / bench minutes. Jack hit the nail on the head. He's absolutely correct. And I said at the time of the TBJ trade, the Troy Brown Jr. trade, obviously I was cool trading Shake Milton. Trading Troy Brown Jr. was not my favorite thing because he is the theoretical 3-and-D guy who's maybe a little overvalued defensively and a little too streaky offensively to like be a core top 7 rotation guy on a playoff team, right? I mean, like he wasn't in the Lakers rotation by playoff time last season. but he was always kind of a hot hand guy, and he was more length, more size. There's a reason the Wolves signed him in the offseason. He is exactly the sort of player you could plug in now instead of Kyle Anderson to play at the 3, and he'd be more effective offensively. No, he's not going to play make. He's not going to run the offense. But in the playoffs, guess who's doing that for 45 minutes effectively? It's Anthony Edwards. You don't need Troy Brown Jr. to initiate offense. Kyle Anderson's playmaking role has been all but extinguished from what the Wolves are trying to do right now. So this is exactly the sort of situation where a guy with length, athleticism, three-point shooting chops, the ability to get hot in a big moment, in a big game, that is exactly what the Wolves need. And the Monte Morris acquisition is certainly defensible. I mean, at the time, I'm not at all, and Jack didn't say this either, I don't want to pan that acquisition. And I'm not saying Troy Brown Jr. is a better player. At the time, there was concern about Mike Conley breaking down. Jordan McLaughlin had not been playing well. Of course, that changed toward the end of the regular season, and now neither one of them is in the rotation, whereas Troy Brown Jr. could have absorbed the Kyle Anderson minutes. And we're talking, what? Kyle Anderson played 13 minutes in game 3, and he played 6 minutes in game 4. So we're talking 10-ish minutes a game. And TBJ, I'm not saying that wins or loses a game or a series or anything, but he'd be a better fit for what this version of the Wolves is trying to do against this version of the Nuggets than what Kyle Anderson is. So interesting to see. Now, Kyle Anderson, of course, is a free agent, and a lot of things could change in the offseason, a topic for hopefully further down the road, hopefully not later this week or early next week, but further down the road this offseason. But a player like Troy Brown Jr. returning, well, I shouldn't say return, it may not be him, but a player like him who can provide, he's obviously a better shooter than, say, a Josh Minott, but theoretically, I guess Josh Minett's more of a 4 than a 3, but that type of a long, athletic, do multiple things type guy versus a guy who doesn't have scoring punch or athleticism in Kyle Anderson is a better fit for a team with a ball dominant superstar like Anthony Edwards. So off-season conversation, but relevant currently with where this series sits right now. All right, let's talk a little bit about Ant and the Wolves offense overall. That's how we'll close out the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the playoff action with up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball and hockey entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. You can download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, it's Prize Picks. The app is Prize Picks. The code is LOCKEDONNBA, and that's spelled LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right. Let's talk a little bit about offense. So Anthony Edwards obviously was incredible in game 4, and he finished with 44 points on 16 of 25 shooting, 5 of 8 outside the arc, 7 of 8 at the line, 5 assists, 5 boards, 2 steals, and a block. It was an easy, if there is such a thing, an easy 40+. And I think it left everybody thinking, I mean, I felt this way after the 43-point game. I don't know who's stopping Anthony Edwards. If he has an off shooting night, that's when he needs to know to delegate, as it were, in the half court. And he does that for the most part. But I thought he did a really good job picking his spots in transition in this game. I thought that everything Anthony Edwards did decision-making wise was great. But then athletically, he was so impressive, and by far the most athletically impressive player on the floor, and it's not even close in this series, is Anthony Edwards. The way he was slithering into the lane, the way he was getting his jumper off from anywhere, the way he was picking his spots in transition specifically, knowing when to push the pace and when to slow it down a little bit, was all very impressive. The problem is that nobody else came to the party. Karl-Anthony Towns had a miserable offensive game. We talked about that extensively on Monday's show. He was just 5 of 18 shooting, and it was one of those weird games where he only attempted 4 threes and he attempted 14 twos, And it really felt like Cat just needed to spread the floor a little bit more. It would have only given Ant a little bit more space. And Cat's obviously one of the best shooters, period, in the entire NBA. He just needs to shoot a few more threes. And I really don't think that's easier said than done. I mean, Cat can get his shot off from anywhere. He did shoot one ill-advised one rush toward the end of the game that, like, hey, you're semi-open, but this isn't the best shot right now. Like that, Cat's just, he has to, like, if he plays like he did for the first, 7 games of the playoffs, they're going to be just fine. They're going to be just fine. If he plays like he did in game 4, they're going to lose the next 2 games. They need Cat to provide something of value offensively. Rudy Gobert is another one, obviously in a different way and in a different role. He only had 5 field goal attempts. He did get 9 free throw attempts in this game because the Nuggets just kept wrapping him up. But they just haven't been effective with Rudy in the pick and roll. And there was one time Rudy ended up with 5 turnovers. At least one of them was the Nuggets read the short roll and the swing the kick to the opposite corner. But that play can be more effective for Minnesota. Denver, it's not like Denver has shot blocking presence at the rim, right? Like Jokic can block shots kind of, sort of, if he needs to. Michael Porter Jr. is athletic. Aaron Gordon's athletic, but they don't have a Rudy Gobert. They don't have a Victor Wembanyama at the rim. So I think the Wolves just, they need to involve Rudy a little bit more in the offense. As weird as that sounds, not force feeding him like they did early this season, right? It shouldn't look like that, but to look for him more on those short rolls. And then, they had a couple of successful lobs, right? The one he had over Aaron Gordon that he converted the dunk on a tough pass from, I think it was from Conley from the left side of the floor. But Rudy as a short roller is a weapon, and Rudy's gravity rolling to the rim is a weapon. And it will only help create more space for Anthony Edwards and ultimately, hopefully, Karl-Anthony Towns as well. We already talked about role players. That's the other piece of this. Nickeil Alexander-Walker's got to make his open shots. Jaden McDaniels has to make his open shots. And if they get closed out on hard, they have to be able to put the ball on the floor and make a play. And it may not be for themselves. It may be, a couple hard dribbles and kick the ball to the slot for a jumper from somebody, for a relatively open 3 from Mike Conley or Ant or whoever. Or it might be for themselves. I mean, Jaden's had good offensive moments in the playoffs so far. He had 11 points on 4 of 8 last game. The game before that, he was effectively the same, 10 points on 6 shots. To get him a little bit more involved, Conley was really good last game and has been good overall in this series. I think that the Rudy piece and the knocking down open threes for role players, Conley's going to get his shots. He's going to hit a couple floaters. He's going to hit a couple threes. And obviously it'd be great to get a 25-point Mike Conley throwback game to, Grizzlies Mike Conley. I don't think the Wolves can count on that. It'd be great if it happened. I think it's more likely it's McDaniels or it's Nickeil Alexander-Walker or those guys making open shots and then putting the ball on the floor and converting off the dribble if they need to, or creating offense for others if they're run off the 3-point line. Those are the things to me that are going to move the needle a little bit more. And Naz Reid as well. I'd lump him in there too, although he did play well last game. But getting Naz hot, getting him involved is going to be super important too. All right. That's all I have for you today. I talked earlier about the postcast. It's tonight, and I am hosting this evening with Jack Borman. It'll be late. It'll be around midnight, probably Central Time. You can find it on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, and then after the fact, you can listen. It'll be the next episode right here in your audio feed for Locked On Wolves. And then on Wednesday, I'm actually hosting the Minnesota basketball party as well. That's myself. It's also Jack Borman again from Canisupis. It's Reggie Wilson, the sports anchor at KARE 11, and Ron Johnson, the Ron Johnson Show. We're going to talk all things Wolves Nuggets. On Wednesday, we'll live stream that on YouTube around 9 a.m. Central. So bright and early, immediately following, just a few hours after we wrap the postcast. Earlier in the morning, I guess, we'll do the basketball party. I'll still have my show on Wednesday as well. So it'll be a lot kind of rapid fire there right here on the feed. So be sure to stay tuned for all of that. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.